Before we get into this episode, I would like to make a quick disclaimer that all of Society Inspired's interviews and the information we share are 100% for learning experience and to hear the different sides of the various issues we discuss. We never endorse nor support violence, and we are committed to promoting peace. I want to create a safe space for learning and comfortable place for people to be able to start to speak. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 12th episode of Society Inspired. My name is Gemma. I am 15 years old and a Palestinian American teen. I am super stoked to have Jack Lam as our special guest for episode number 12. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us your story, and also share your preferred pronouns, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Jack Lam. I use they, them pronouns. I am Malaysian by nationality, Chinese by ethnicity, and immigrated here about almost 8 years now. So came as an international student, did my undergrad and graduate degrees here, and now I work as trauma therapist in Yellow Chair Collective, which is a psychotherapy group here based in LA, focusing on the Asian American community.
Great. How did you decide to become a trauma therapist?
Oh, I think I feel like it's always the, be who you needed when you were younger.
Yeah,
So
for real.
had a lot of trauma. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my growing up was struggling with my LGBTQ identity
Yeah,
and, the trauma that comes with that.
yeah.
And so, I was suicidal for a long while when I was in my teen years.
Yeah.
Um, when I immigrated here, I started finding more resources. I became a volunteer with the Trevor Project. So I did
Mhm.
crisis counseling while I was in school, which I really loved. And then after I graduated, I started working for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline here in LA.
Yes.
Loved that job, even though it was, limiting in a lot of ways, but
Yeah, for
really
sure.
good experience. And
Mhm.
it really spoke to me, like being able to support people in crisis. And I wanted to do more of that, but like less short term and more long term,
I see.
because yeah, crisis contacts are just like one phone call and then you never talk or see them again.
Yeah.
So yeah, went to graduate school for my degree to become a therapist, and here I am.
Since we are in Pride Month and are focusing on the LGBTQIA plus community, can you describe some common traumas and mental health issues the community deals with and seeks guidance for?
Yeah, I think first I'll start with kind of defining trauma, because I think, even though we talk a lot about it, I think a lot of people still have maybe not a correct understanding or yeah, just a scattered understanding of trauma, right? Because
I
it's such a
understand.
generalized term now.
Okay.
But, because I think for the longest time when people thought of traumas, they thought of like things that are really big
Mm.
and like veterans in war being traumatized and
Yeah.
huge accidents or murders. Any of those could be very traumatic. And that's true. Those are all traumatic potentially. But the thing about trauma is it is subjective, in the sense that something that's traumatic for one person could be not as traumatic for another person.
Yeah.
So trauma is what happens when our bodies are experiencing amounts of stress that is so overwhelming that it doesn't know what to do with,
Hmm.
right? So it goes into this survival mode of like, right, like you've heard fight response, flight response, freeze response, and then sometimes the fawn response as well. All
Yeah.
of these to kind of minimize the threat to our safety that we perceive.
Mm.
And the reason why I kind of wanted to start with a definition of trauma is because within the LGBTQ community, and even though things have been a lot better, and it continues to get better through the years, but a lot of LGBTQ folks, especially youth, grow up in a way where they often have to hide who they really are, right? For fear of repercussions. And in some ways that can be very traumatic because you're constantly hyper vigilant, right? You're constantly living in this anxiety of people finding things out about you that you don't want them to.
For sure.
Sometimes you think about the threat of, if I were outed, what would happen, right? Would I be kicked out of school? Would I be kicked out of my home? Would I lose friendships? Would I lose family? Would I lose housing, food, shelter, all of these things? And so there's this term called complex trauma, right? Where it's focused more so on kind of what happens when we live in this chronic overwhelm of anxiety and stress. And in some ways, a lot of the LGBTQ community live like that when they're closeted because of the constant anxiety. And, mental health issues can stem from that as well.
Yeah.
Right? Whether that's like working on relationships, right? Not feeling like you're able to trust people because for the longest time you've had this fear that people might turn on you. You might be working on depression because you've internalized shame from holding this identity, wishing that you weren't this way in a cisgender heteronormative society. You might be dealing with anxiety because for the longest time you've lived in anxiety and fear of people just turning on you or hurting you or harming you, and seeing the news or whatever it is, right, that keeps showing queer people being discriminated against, oppressed, even brutalized or killed. That all can be very, very taxing.
Yeah. It can be very scary too for, I say especially youth, but for everybody. Like Pride this year probably wasn't like, it probably was nerve-wracking. Like you didn't know what was going to happen. Like who was going to come? What was anybody going to harm anybody? So that was something I was praying for that just wouldn't happen. That made me so nervous.
Yeah, I think of, I don't remember what state it was in the US, but they had found like 31 white supremacist folks kind of waiting outside of a pride rally or planning an attack on. In where?
In a U-Haul. They found them in a U-Haul or something.
Was that what it was? I don't know. I didn't see much news about it. I tried to like not because it's very intense.
Yeah.
But yes, I do remember there were 31 of them and they were planning something about, basically in Idaho, I think.
Idaho, I think that's where it was. I'm trying to find it right now. But yeah, I saw that. I was like, oh God. Like
yeah, and that's like, what, as you said, like youth, it's scary for youth, but it's also scary for everyone, right? Like youth see this and they see this as like a sign of like, oh, there's still so much like hate and rejection of our identities.
yeah.
And even for adults like myself, we've lived through, for example, Pulse. When that happened in Orlando, the nightclub shooting in Pulse was the biggest mass shooting in the history of the US when that happened. Unfortunately, there's been bigger shootings, which terrible. And I remember my first Pride event in LA, what was the year of the Pulse shooting. And I was volunteering at LA Pride the day that the Pulse shooting news came out. So I was scared, so scared for my life. And yeah, and I was in like this queer group, community group, and all of us were trying to text each other, making sure each other were safe, we're okay. And I was at this Pride event, like half dissociated because I was like, oh my fuck. Sorry. No.
You can swear, it's okay.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Like, am I gonna be safe? And then there was news during that year at LA Pride that they had apprehended someone in Santa Monica, which was pretty close, with guns in the back of the trunk, like heading to Pride. So I was
That's oh my goodness. I cannot
terrified.
like you should be able to celebrate. And this year I was just like, no one please, like with how much news, especially about the LGBTQIA plus community has come out in 2022 with the government and everything. I was just so scared. And you shouldn't have to be scared. So uh carrying on that, do you have any specific goals that you are hoping to achieve within the LGBTQIA plus community?
Oh, I feel like that's a huge question.
I mean, this could be like with your clients or
Mm,
anybody, anything you want to talk about.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely feel like mental health is, my focus. So my goals are often mental health focused, but I think a lot of things ties into our mental health, right? Like, for example, just the shame of being holding this LGBTQ identity for a lot of people growing up in a cis heteronormative society, right?
Yeah,
I hope that we're able to kind of unlearn that. I hope within the community and, outside of the community that we are able to kind of celebrate diversity, like really, instead of just working towards acceptance or tolerance.
100%.
And when I think about, like, especially with my clients, a lot of them are Asian American or other people of color. um, I think about how much stigma there still is, um, for mental health and also for LGBTQ identities.
Yeah,
So hopefully being able to kind of dispel that and encourage people that, therapy is a great space for anyone, really, not just people with mental illnesses or people with struggles, but anyone who's hoping to kind of make more sense of their life, try to find more purpose, be able to live in a way that feels good, right? Because
yeah,
life shouldn't feel terrible, tiring, taxing, hopeless.
yeah,
It shouldn't all just be grief and suffering all the time, which, uh, you know, as you said, with everything that's going on in the world, especially in the LGBTQIA realm, it can be really hard to not feel like everything is
yeah.
on a downward spiral.
Lonely is, I know a lot of people go to therapy for that reason,
Yeah.
and having an LGBTQIA plus therapist is probably a really safe place to not feel lonely. So,
Yeah, that's what I hope.
well, you're amazing. So, like,
Thank you.
I find it hard to believe. Not that the community has ever necessarily been safe, but given the change in the political environment over the last 8 years, do you think the community lives in a less accepting world now?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
it's
guess, how do you mean?
I because I feel like it's going up and then it's going down. Like it's
Mm,
you know what I mean? Like Gen Z is being raised to be accepting, but at the same time, everywhere we look, the LGBTQIA community is being pushed down. So it's like, are we in a less accepting environment or a more accepting environment? Like I feel like
hmm.
it's going both ways. Like what do you think?
Uh, No, I totally get that. I think I want to say that it is tough thinking about the world that Gen Z is coming into and inheriting
Yeah.
because, well, I'm on the cups, so I'll say we, because we are coming into a world. I'm like cusp of Gen Z and millennial, I think, but like we are coming
Okay.
into a world, um,
Oh,
as like, inheriting this world from millennials and boomers who have, have a lot of outdated, sometimes outright ignorant and hateful views on
Mhm.
the LGBTQ community. And we're still struggling with that, right? Like in terms of like
Sure.
politicians and people in power, a lot of them are still people who hold very
Listen.
unaffirming
Yeah.
views.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
And it's exhausting, right? Like to be
Yeah.
minimized. Because I think one of the things that I honestly, as I worked in like youth suicide prevention and worked with a lot of youth in my internship, because I was a children's therapist, I find that a lot of people so quickly discredit what youth have to say as if they don't know anything.
Thank you. 100%. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
And it seeps into, even as therapists, we're trained to like be affirming and listening and validating, but it does seep into a lot of therapists, right? Because there's still this like when you're treating a youth, there's still this power dynamic of I'm the adult in the room and you're the child in the room,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes if therapists are unaware, they can kind of reinforce a lot of this like I know better than you dynamic. I'm the elder. Um, you're you're saying this now, but you don't really mean that, or like you don't know what the world is like yet, quote
Yeah.
unquote. And it's so, yeah, it's like invalidating. It's very
Yeah.
ridiculous, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I for sure see that. Um, support resources. Are there any support resources that you can give the LGBTQIA community and youth?
Hmm.
I cannot speak right now.
No, you're fine.
And
You're
then I
doing
try to
well.
talk and it's like, okay.
Yeah. I think when I think about resources, I really think of community. I think of one of the most life affirming, life changing things to have happened for me as I was coming into my queer identity was being able to find first that space online. When I was living in Malaysia, like there wasn't a lot of like
Oh,
people in my life that I trusted because I was so afraid of, being found out. So I really sought online spaces to be able to connect with other LGBTQ people. At
yeah.
the time, I think it was really funny because it was actually Lady Gaga's fan site called littlemonsters.com. I know, please. Judge me.
That's awesome. I love that. No, that's amazing.
No, I mean, it's really, yeah, I do think it's super cute because at the time when I was in Malaysia, I had an account on littlemonsters.com. I had a gay friend in the Philippines, and then I had another gay friend who was in Austin, Texas. And I don't know if I mean, I still keep in touch with my friend in the Philippines. He lives in Canada now. Wendell, if you're listening, hi. And, and my friend in Texas, I actually went to visit them when I was living in Texas a couple of years ago. So
Awesome.
we saw each other in person after like more than a decade of like not chatting online anymore.
That's that's like amazing.
Yeah. So it's really cool. I mean, I think of like how amazing it is to have community like that, right? To be talking
Yeah.
about things. And then the other thing, finally, when I got to the US, when I went to community college, I created a club at our campus called Queer People of Color. And it
Oh,
was all just like LGBTQ POC folks like coming together once
awesome.
a week and talking about our shit. And it was great. I loved it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with like community being like number one support. That it's always the most helpful to have people that relate to you and
Mhm.
people you can relate to. So,
Yeah.
uh, and any resources for people who aren't in the LGBTQIA plus community that you'd like my followers and I to read, watch, listen to, any
Mm.
sorts of.
I mean, when it comes to social media, I think it's the great part about it is that there's so many like activists and educators that you can follow. I
Oh,
think
easy to
of,
find.
yeah, it is. And, there are, of course, great ones and the not so great ones. And I say not so great not in the sense to invalidate the work, but more so like just being more careful about the content that you do consume, right? Because a lot of it can also come from people who still struggle with acceptance or
Mm-hmm.
their own identities, and they may be putting out things that are harmful. And,
Yeah. I was gonna say misworded, like not using the correct words.
yeah. And, I think, you learn that as you go. And for the time being, just follow the people that you think feels the most accepting, life affirming, non shaming, non judgmental, things that would make you feel good about yourself, right? Not things that make you feel bad about yourself. Because if there's one thing that I know that it's shame doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to shame anyone into being a better ally.
No.
And, I think with activists and educators, especially those who come from a place more of love than shame, it takes a lot of work to be able to kind of create that content. So I really do respect the people who continue to take the time and continue to find grace and generosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah.
And lastly, where can they find, or where can my followers find you?
I sorry.
Oh, I was saying you on social media, where you work.
Oh yeah, okay. So I am I'm on social media. I don't post as often as I used to anymore, but I still do have some really, really good resources on like if you want to learn about genderqueer, non-binary identities on my page, it's at Jack Lam LJ on Instagram. Um, and in terms of where I work at Yellow Chair Collective, so you can always check out yellowchaircollective.com. We are a psychotherapy practice, and we offer individual, family, couples, counseling services. And I also host a podcast for Yellow Chair Collective.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and it's called Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. It's available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts. I upload the episodes on YouTube as well. So wherever you want
Same.
to listen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a podcast mostly about Asians living in America, Asian American identity, and mental health. So yeah, if you're interested in that, feel free to follow.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview. Make sure you follow Jack on all their social media platforms and check out their work and resources that they give. And make sure to follow our social media platforms as well so you don't miss out on more interviews and important information. I hope you enjoyed the 12th episode of Society Inspired, and we will see you guys next time.
All right, thank you so much. This is really good.